What's up, guys? It's me, Tim, and guess what day it is? It is. It is the 81 year anniversary of Battle of Narvik, which is the town I live in. Um, it was quite well known in World War II, you can say. So, what better to do when I don't have anything to do to basically just check out the the uh, historical story of it. This video is by Historograph, and they make a lot of awesome videos. It's a 15-minute video, so let's enjoy it.
Of all the naval task forces dispatched by Germany for the invasion of Norway, the strongest was that sent to the far northern port of Narvik. 2,000 troops on 10 destroyers, escorted by the Kriegsmarines' two fast battleships, Gneisenau and Scharnhorst. Entering the Fjord in the early hours of April 9th,
Alright.
the German destroyers sunk two Norwegian coastal defence ships that refused to stand aside before landing their troops and seizing control of the city before the sun came up.
So,
Seizing control.
Here is actually the town. It is quite small. Um, it has been 81 years ago since the Allied forces came and tried to help Norway to retake Narvik because it was occupied by Germany, and Norway was neutral. Same with Sweden, and the transport of iron ore was basically the transportation or transport that Hitler was interested in to make more weapons and such. Um, Let me just. There we go.
Of the city before the sun came up. It was a stunning achievement, but just the beginning. The German troops were hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly forces and would soon be made the prime target for thousands of Allied troops. The siege of Narvik was about to begin.
Siege of Narvik.
The troops that landed at Narvik on April 9th were 3 battalions.
April 9th, yeah, that is actually today. April 9th. So, if you have played the game called Battlefield 5, the story mode regarding Battle of Narvik says that the night of 8 the 8th of April 1940. That was when the British commando troops came with parachuting over Narvik's mountain, or they, I think they actually came to somewhere around um, Björnefjell, which would be this area, maybe. So, yeah, you will hear it later in the story, but yeah, um, yeah,
Commanded by General Edouard Diedel. Despite being low on supplies and surrounded by hundreds of miles of hostile terrain, Dietl wasted little time before going on to the offensive. Two battalions were landed at Björkvik after sunrise on the
yeah,
9th,
quick,
moving to
okay,
capture a major Norwegian supply depot at Elvergårdsmoen. By April 13th, German troops had reached Lapphagen, and 3 days later the railway station at
oh
Björnfjell was
yeah,
captured, giving the
Björnefjell.
Germans a
Okay,
vital rail link to New.
I was kind of wrong there. So it's here. Björnefjell is. So I thought here. I don't know why. But yeah, there is the border between Norway and Sweden in the north. So
Neutral Sweden. After swift pressure was applied to the Swedes, 2 days later 350 tons of provisions rolled across the border, enough to sustain 4,000 troops for 3 months. With his supply base secured, Dietl now ordered his troops over onto the defensive to await the inevitable counterattacks by the Norwegians and the first
16
which began to arrive in the area during the 14th and 15th of April. Under the overall command of Major General Piers Maxey, the British began to build up strength around the port of Harstad, supported by a naval task led by Admiral Lord Cork. On April 14th, the Navy made the first major offensive move towards Narvik, dispatching the battleship Warspite to clear the fjord of German destroyers. For more detail on these naval actions at Narvik and elsewhere in Norway, watch.
So naval battles were a huge part the of the Battle of Narvik, because it was basically like a naval town, I guess you can say. Um, yeah, but I would say there are forgotten history or not well known parts where there was more like up in the mountains and in and around the area.
My video on Operation Reservebung in its entirety. With naval superiority achieved, the prospect of an amphibious landing directly on Narvik was now raised, but Maxey concluded that it just wasn't feasible. He cited a lack of equipment amongst British troops and the difficulty of landing under fire in areas with snow up to 6 feet deep. The plans were shelved, awaiting further.
I have walked in 6 feet deep snow. It's not fun. Well, it's kind of fun now, since you can may you can play in the snow basically. But back then it was like it's not a good terrain, because of they didn't have the correct shoe wear or something like that, materials and such.
Reinforcements of the small Allied force currently in Narvik. As the British hesitated, the Norwegian 6th Division prepared its first counter-offensive, having managed to mobilise its scattered forces and bring them to the northern area around Narvik. Under the leadership of Major General Carl Gustav Fleischer, 4 battalions drove into the Kutang Valley from April 24th, eventually compelling the heavily outnumbered Germans here to pull back from Gröttangen to a defensive line north of Björkvik. It was an early success, but achieved with a great superiority in numbers and casualties 10 times higher than the Germans
Wow,
suffered. As the Norwegians and
that's
Germans licked their
crazy.
wounds, a steady stream of Allied troops poured into the Narvik area. On April 28th, three French mounted battalions arrived, under the command of
French,
Brigadier
alright.
General Émile Bethouard. Two of these were immediately pressed into action in the Bjerkvik area to aid the Norwegians. By May
Hmm.
7th, Allied strength in the region was up to 18 battalions.
I've been to Bjerkvik, and yeah, from me, for example, standing in Bjerkvik and just looking over the sea, I can look directly to I can look directly to the um, mountains of Narvik, and yeah, I can look directly to it. So,
Three British, five French, four Polish, and six Norwegian. Opposing them were just three German mounted infantry battalions and an assortment of small units made up of the crews of sunken destroyers. This was a huge
mhm.
numerical superiority, but Maxey was still reluctant to approve any kind of direct attack on Narvik. He favoured a more cautious approach which would see Allied troops advance along both sides of the Fjord in a pincer movement on Narvik. On April 29th, the southern flank in this advance was over.
Oh, by the way, something about the Battle of Narvik. It was Hitler's first ever loss that happened, and it was a great loss because um, yeah, he lost the supply of iron ore as a result of it. Uh, yeah,
With Anglo-French forces landing at Chulnes and advancing towards Antilles.
Schulness,
Meanwhile, the
Uncles.
Norwegians and French prepared to begin a second
Okay.
offensive in the north, with attacks along their entire line. By this point, the Norwegians had reorganised to form two makeshift brigades, each with the strength of three battalions. In this new offensive, 7th
Uh,
Brigade, supported by the French, were to attack south to Bjerkvik.
I kinda right now I'm just looking at the map here and thinking like these must be ski troops or something because like they are moving through the mountains. I don't know.
While 6th Brigade advanced across the wilderness of the Vasterland to the east.
What's
On April
that?
30th, the attack got underway and met with initial success before Dietl force-marched reinforcements to the northern front, which was under the command of Major Alois Windisch.
Alois.
Despite a numerical advantage of over 6 to 1, the Allied advance became painfully slow. One of the key
Ah.
problems was the terrain, with the Germans holding onto high ground strong points that had to be painstakingly cleared by the French mountain troops, and only at night to avoid air attacks. Just as in
Oh.
central Norway, German air power was proving a decisive factor, especially after the capture of air bases in the Trondheim area, which were substantially closer to Narvik. It wasn't
Germany.
until more artillery and air support could be provided by the Norwegians that more progress was made, forcing the Germans back to a line with Lagersvatnun at its centre by May 5th. The
Alright.
situation looked dire for the isolated Germans, and it was about to get worse.
Around the 5th of May, or well, a little before that, I think, it was starting to become spring, so snow starting to melt, and when snow starts to melt here in Narvik, when there's already a lot of snow, the terrain is awful because it's like real bumpy and real, well, you can say slushy. So yeah.
On May 5th, the Allies appointed Claude Auchinleck to take overall command of the now 25,000 strong force in the Narvik region.
Louis?
Auchinleck quickly let it be known that more aggressive action would now be favoured, and General Maxey took note. He quickly ordered a landing at Björkvik to turn the German line and cut off those troops still holding the Norwegians to the north. After being delayed for 2 days due to a lack of available transport, the landings began at midnight on May 13th. Björkvik was mainly defended by German sailors who had been pressed into service on land, and a naval bombardment compelled many of them to flee in panic. The town was swiftly captured by French Foreign Legion troops and
I think the blue ones here are France or French troops.
Allied forces advanced towards Eord, as the German line in the north
Eord?
risked a total collapse. Major Windisch now had to try and pull his troops north of Björkvik back, while reforming some semblance of a front facing west. A series of fierce rearguard actions were fought as the Germans pulled back, narrowly preventing an encirclement by holding a bridge over the Vastal River just long enough to escape. Windisch had gotten his troops out, but the situation for the Germans...
I think I see the strategy. I think they're gonna pin them at the mountain of Björnefjell, or basically near the border of Sweden.
was now looking critical, especially after a renewed attack by 6th Brigade across the high plateau area just west of the
Plateau.
Swedish border.
Ah,
From May 15th, 4 Norwegian
I
battalions
know where
pressed
that
hard
is.
against
I've
their
been
French
there.
opponents here, fighting with their backs to the...
My family has a mountain cabin there, so yeah. It seems like they try to isolate them.
The walls, the Germans put up a fearsome resistance, producing some of the heaviest fighting of the entire Narvik campaign. Nonetheless, by May 22nd, Norwegian troops were within striking distance of the German supply base at Bjornfjell, and General
Björnefjell,
Dietler's battered battalions were in a state of near collapse. If Bjornfjell was captured, Dietler would have no choice but to surrender his men. It was a desperate situation. Luckily for Dietl, though, help was well and truly on its way. On May 4th, Lieutenant General Valentin Feuerstein, commander of the 2nd Mountain Division, was ordered to march north from Trondheim to Narvik.
Oh,
This
March.
was a 480 kilometre
Damn!
march across fjords, through
That's
woods and
actually
over mountains.
crazy.
It was terrain the Allies considered effectively impassable.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, Feuerstein and his men passed it, covering the first 160 kilometres in 2 days. Scrambling to react, the Allies rushed troops south, but they were simply too slow and too badly coordinated. Pushed back from Moshan quickly, the British tried to hold Mo i Rana, but were dislodged again. By the last week in May, the 2nd Mountain Division was at the Buda, just 200 kilometres from Narvik. Feuerstein's breathtaking advance took the pressure off Dietl at a crucial time, as well as forcing the Allies to divert resources.
So, the last ditch, you can say. So, Germans tried to isolate or pin them down inside of Narvik as a result of them trying to take Björnefjell, is what I get a sense for here.
His division, the capture of air bases further north increased the flow of reinforcements to Dietl, and the presence of German air support increased.
Normally in May there wouldn't be that much snow, I think. It really depends where in the mountains that is.
Once again, the Allies had been far too slow in getting land-based air assets operational. Bardufoss Air Base to the north was not ready until May 21st, and an air base at Bordeaux was not finished until May 26th. whereupon it was swiftly captured by Fürstein's men, giving the Germans an excellent base very close to Narvik. By the time British planes could be flown in, it was far, far too late. Despite the threat to their south, the Allied forces prepared to press a final attack on the depleted troops still in Narvik. This would be under the command of General WWII as the British troops moved away to try and deal with Feuerstein's division further south. The Allied landings began in the early hours of May 27th, and the Germans were soon forced to retreat, fighting a series of vicious rearguard actions as they did so. To the west of Narvik, a Polish attack in support of the landings was held
Okay,
to allow
the red ones are Polish. Okay.
Troops in the city to escape. By 10 p.m, Narvik was in Allied hands as the first city to be retaken from Germany during the Second World War. By this time, however, disastrous events in France had completely overtaken the campaign in Norway. 3 days before the recapture of Narvik, Lord Cork received orders to prepare to evacuate all Allied troops in Norway, and not to...
That is shady in my opinion, but I kinda understand it, but it's a douchey move because they didn't give the Norwegian troops any kinds of real warning that it's going to happen.
to tell the Norwegians a thing about it.
Yeah.
Cork's orders were symptomatic of the lack of trust between the British and their Norwegian allies. This was driven on the British side by a paranoia about spies in the Norwegians' midst, as the Commander-in-Chief of the Norwegian Army, General Otto Ruger, acknowledged. Excessive talk here at home in the days after April 9 about treason and Kiesling created the impression in London that Norway was full of traitors.
Wow.
By the time of the Narvik campaign, the Norwegians also distrusted the British for their repeated unannounced evacuations and withdrawals and the amateurish way that much of the campaign had been conducted. It was a recipe for disaster, and throughout the siege, coordination between Allied and Norwegian commands was extremely poor. With this final evacuation, however, the Norwegians did at least get some advance warning on May 31st, if only because it would be impossible to disengage French, British and Polish troops without the cooperation of the Norwegians. It's to the Norwegian army's great credit that they continued to fight after being told of the intention to leave Norway, when according to Lord Cork they might, with some justification, have decided to lay down their arms at once and so gravely prejudice our withdrawal.
Norway didn't give up. That is something I remembered.
Began on June 4th, just as the one from Dunkirk was finishing. A sizable naval task force was assembled off the coast, including the aircraft carriers Ark Royal and Glorious and 10 destroyers to ferry troops out to the bigger ships. Some 14,700 troops were pulled off in the first convoy a few days later, escorted home only by the cruiser Vindictive. This was a ludicrously poor escort, reflecting the Admiralty's confidence that the cruiserina was too weak to launch another raid into the Norwegian Sea. This assumption would be proven disastrously wrong on June 8th, when HMS Glorious was sunk by the Scharnhorst in Gneisenau while proceeding home on her own. At 10 p.m. on June 8th, General Ruger began to negotiate for a ceasefire, which took effect at midnight on June 10th, bringing the battle for Norway to a close. The 2 months between invasion and defeat had seen instances of incredible bravery, like the actions of HMS Glowworm or HMS Acasta in their respective last stands, but also gross British incompetence in the way that the land and sea campaigns were pursued. The Germans had pulled off a stunning victory, but at a heavy cost in ships. 1 heavy cruiser, 2 light cruisers and 10 destroyers sunk, and most of the others damaged. The Royal Navy too had taken a beating, with 1 aircraft carrier, 2 cruisers, 7 destroyers and 4 submarines lost. The French and Poles also lost each 1 destroyer, and the Norwegians lost their entire navy.
Oh man,
destroyers that did make it
that's a tough
However,
blow.
it's important to remember that the Allied navies were far larger than the German and could absorb many more losses. The Kriegsmarines' losses were a crippling blow that made any future operation on the scale of Weserübung an impossibility. In manpower, German losses during the campaign were 5,296, which included the crew of the Blucher, but it's not clear whether this includes other naval casualties sustained. The British lost 1,869 on land, to which we can probably add over 2,000 naval casualties, including a huge amount on HMS Glorious and her 2 destroyer escorts. France and Poland lost a combined 533, and Norway around 1,700.
Wow.
Furthermore, the Allies had lost masses of equipment which had to be left behind during the repeated evacuations. The Germans had actually gained equipment due to the capture of Allied stockpiles. To summarise the Norway campaign, I'll leave the final word to Henrik Lund, whose excellent book on the Norway campaign provided the backbone for much of this series. The Germans achieved most of their objectives in what must be
I think I've seen him
military
before.
Success in the face of overwhelming odds. Thank you for watching this video and this 4-part series on the Battle for Norway. It's been quite a journey, and I hope you've enjoyed watching these videos as much as I've enjoyed.
There it is.
As always,
the Siege of Narvik.
Patrons, and if you'd like to support my work,
aka Battle of Narvik,
made, that's the place to go.
Shout out to Historiograph for making videos like these. I really appreciate the historical points of view he has, or they have. Yeah. Yeah. The British troops left. I kind of have a bone to pick with the British forces in 1940. But yeah. Anyway, that is it. I gonna go now. Maybe play some Battlefield 5 or something. Anyway, if you guys like this reaction of mine, go ahead and click like and subscribe to my channel for more videos. Yeah.